紀錄劇場早於上世紀初出現，100年嚟起起跌跌，有啲時候比較盛行，引起比較大嘅迴響。悉尼大學嘅 Paul Dwyer 咁樣解釋佢嘅起跌。
I think the reason why from time to time, the reason why we see a resurgence of interest in, I'm talking internationally now, in verbatim and documentary theatre, we see it in times of political change. So if you think about something like, societies that are in transition, like South Africa or Northern Ireland, perhaps Hong Kong, I think people become very interested to revisit key moments in history. I think we see it in moments of technological development. So verbatim theatre probably required the invention of the recording technology. And now when we're having this rapid transition to we're having our new industrial revolution, aren't we, with the digital era? I think that's been a big driving force behind the resurgence of interest in documentary and verbatim work. So social change, technological development, and an anxiety about the truth, which of course we have massively.
響澳洲，根據 Paul Brown 主編嘅書《Verbatim: Staging Memory and Community》所講，早響50-60年代曾經有過一啲紀錄劇場作品嘅出現，之後唔少社區戲劇活動都有用到口述歷史嘅材料。社區戲劇亦都催生咗澳洲第一個完全用訪問筆錄作為文本嘅戲劇演出，就係 Paul Brown 響1991年寫嘅《震後餘生》（Aftershocks）。
I come from a community theatre tradition, so all the work that I do is connected to a particular community, and I've worked with many different communities, and just before we worked on Aftershocks, I had been working with a group of environmentalists and community members concerned about environmental issues on the Murray River, Australia's biggest river. And we wrote a play called Murray River Story, which was all about the environmental issues of the Murray. And it involved 200 people, and they were writers and actors and stage managers. It was a big production for presentation outdoors. But the thing is, it also included interviews that we had transcribed and used to help make up scenes. And I think that's actually, there's been a lot more of that than is recognised in the tradition of Australian community theatre. Doing interviews, transcribing them, using people's real words to make dialogue, I think had been done quite a bit in community theatre, going back a lot further. So it was a natural step, if you like, from that kind of work to Aftershocks, which is the first time that I had used verbatim for an entire play. So previously I'd used it for sections of a play, just maybe 2 scenes, or even within a scene, just a speech that was based on somebody's real interview. We put together a research group which included theatre workers and people from the club, and we set about making our own interviews. I mean, at the time we weren't really thinking about this as Australia's first full-length verbatim play, but that's what it turned out to be historically. And then of course it came to have a much longer life, not just the community origins and the first season in Newcastle.
同樣嚟自社區戲劇背景嘅 Paul Dwyer，大約喺2000年開始創作佢嘅紀錄劇場。
My first experiences working professionally in theatre were in community-based settings, working with young people or working on projects where there was collaborations between, for example, recently arrived migrant communities and other Australians. So I've always brought to documentary theatre also that emphasis on connecting with communities and trying to find stories that maybe haven't been given much focus, and helping communities voice those experiences that are maybe forgotten or ignored. Then the very first play, however, of a documentary nature that I was involved in scripting, and I was the dramaturg, was a play called CMI, A Certain Maritime Incident. And the title was taken from the title of a report by the Australian Federal Parliament, the Senate. And one day I met with my friend David Williams, who was in the early stages of creating the company version 1.0 with some other very wonderful artists. They were rehearsing a show in our studio space here at the University of Sydney. And I showed David some pages of the transcript of the Senate Committee of Inquiry, and I said, I think we could make a piece of theatre with this as the script. So we started making a lot of shows that were based on transcripts of judicial inquiries, Senate committee inquiries, politicians giving press conferences, these sorts of things. And we found that there was, it was very interesting to work with these materials and to give them a sort of a postmodern treatment to enable audiences to see for themselves the kind of the cracks, the ideological cracks in the official discourse. And so the audiences can start asking themselves, well, what's behind this story? Who are our politicians representing when they talk about, asylum seekers and border protection, illegal immigrants, boat people? Who do they represent? And who do we become when we allow our politicians to represent asylum seekers in this way? So those were the first shows, very much inspired by found materials.
Paul 提到另一位記錄劇場嘅工作者 David Williams， 佢初好多時都用現成嘅文獻記錄作為創作材料，不過近10年佢開始有轉變。
In 2011, kind of moved a little bit away from the inquiry-based shows and started doing shows based on conversations with people. So in 2011, we did make an inquiry show called The Table of Knowledge, which is about a sex scandal that involved a local government. It was around development, kind of urban development building. And but the other show that I made that year was called The Disappearances Project. The Disappearances Project was based on the experiences of people left behind in long-term missing persons cases. So what is it like if you don't know what's happened to your loved one or your friend or your family member, and they might be dead, they're probably dead, but you don't know, there's not a body. So it's much quieter, it's much more conversation-based, it's not the kind of loud political scandals that had characterised past work. I left version 1.0 in 2012 and began working as a freelance artist with other companies. And the first show that I made after leaving version 1.0 was a show called Quiet Faith. And Quiet Faith very much had a similar model to Disappearances Project. It was based on conversations with ordinary people about an issue that was of deep personal significance to them. It was about the way in which people dealt with institutions, but it wasn't big and flashy and loud. It was deliberately intimate.
另一位澳洲藝術家 Watslin Olders 嘅起步點好唔同，所以佢嘅紀錄劇場亦都有獨特嘅展現形式。
I started off as an actor, and I also work as a voice actor on cartoons, so I'm very interested in the voice. It occurred to me that the voice is as unique as a fingerprint, and there's a lot of information in the way we speak as much as what we say. So I'd already been thinking about this a lot, and I had some experiments with creating verbatim theatre, and then I went to London in 2000 and was living there for a year working as a voice actor and performer, and I met a wonderful director by the name of Mark Wing Davey, who was the artistic director of the London Actors Centre. And at that time, he had come back from working with a wonderful American artist by the name of Anna Devere Smith, who works a lot with recordings and makes quite political work using her body. But Mark thought it was quite interesting the way she rehearsed. When she performed, she takes the headphones off and it's a very complete performance. But there was something about the incomplete performance of having the headphones on, seeing the act of listening on stage that he thought was very interesting. I met Mark at that time and he passed on his notes, and I auditioned for that company, the non-fiction theatre company, and ended up working with them. And as far as I know, they were the first group of performers to actually take that technique of the what I call headphone verbatim.
另一位藝術家 Alana Valentine 就專注向文字創作，佢第一個紀錄劇場嘅創作竟然係同欖球有關嘅。
Yeah, it was. I first came into contact with verbatim theatre in about 2004 when I was thinking of writing a play about a local football team called the South Sydney Rabbitohs. So I basically just interviewed all the players, all the people who had been part of the protest. And funnily enough, it's not a play at all hardly about football. It's about the conflict between tradition and modernity. Like, where's the line? What do we value and what don't we? And you know, every great play, even a verbatim play, has a premise that can't be answered. And so I like that, because you can't answer what's the value of tradition, what's the value of, you know, contemporary modernity. It's an unsolvable question, which means that it's going to make a great play. That was my first verbatim play, and I call this sort of pure verbatim because it's literally from transcripts, and they say and and yeah, that was the beginning.
Alana 係一位創作非常之多嘅紀錄劇場編劇，佢試過好多唔同嘅形式。
Yeah, I think I've talked now about the fact that I see my work on a sort of like a spectrum, you know, like which at one end is pure verbatim, where you would use transcripts for some reason because you had to have the absolute authority of that. So yeah, that's one end, and then at the other end is sort of pure drama where you absolutely make it up. But even that, I feel like all of my work is very heavily researched, and so it would never be like it's just coming out of my head, as it were. So, you know, and then I feel, to answer your question, that some of my work is in the middle and slides along that scale.
Alana 從事咗紀錄劇場好一段時間，寫咗好多個劇本。點解佢咁堅持呢？
The first is that real people are infinitely more interesting than anything I can make up in my head in some ways. I mean, real people are so surprising and contradictory, and they're so, you know, all the rules we put around people saying that they're one thing or one identity, you never get that in real life. In real life, people are so multiple and they're so porous, you know, they're so able to be influenced by so many things. So I love that. I love that it brings in communities to the theatre. One of the things I love about verbatim is that it creates this audience cocktail, which I really love, where the story that you're writing spills through the fourth wall into the audience. I think there are a lot of things that artists do that show ugly truths about our histories, and verbatim documentary theatre is a unique way to kind of to remind people that these things happened. And I think it's our job as artists to uncover the things in history that people are too uncomfortable or don't think are important enough to talk about anymore. What documentary theatre does, sometimes very uncomfortably, is say, this is about you. This is about your life. This is about the person sitting next to you, and you can't hide from that.
紀錄劇場同紀錄電影有好多共通之處，不過今次向澳洲，我哋訪問咗咁多位藝術家，佢哋都認為紀錄劇場有佢獨特之處。
There's something about bringing an audience together. Maybe it's a smallish audience, maybe it's 150, 200 people, maybe a few more, but to be all together in the same room at the same time with everyone attending to these stories about a particular event or a particular theme It's like you are enacting right there in the present moment. You are enacting your hope for a viable public sphere. You are enacting your hope and your belief that we can find in our society some democratic spaces where we can hold these stories. And I'm not a film of course the audience at a film event can have a kind of collective experience, but I don't think it's quite as intense as in theatre.
David Williams 就指出紀錄劇場對公眾嘅作用。
I mean, the reason to make theatre out of these kinds of materials is to open some kind of a public conversation around issues of importance. I mean, if it wasn't important, then we should just be producing existing plays or, building houses or something. Certainly there have been cases where the works that I've made have produced really rich and productive conversations. But there's got to be other satisfactions as well. Like otherwise, I feel sometimes that I've flipped from being an expert in one thing to being an expert in another thing. In 2017, the shows that I made were about bullying and harassment in hospitals, so workplace cultures in hospitals, and about football in Sydney. So they're very, very different subjects. And to try and meaningfully be an expert in both of those things, it does stretch the brain a little bit. And each new show that I make requires me to develop some kind of degree of expertise, at least at a conversational level, in something new, and it's always something new.
今次我哋去澳洲，啱啱就遇上亞德萊德一間表演學校重演 Paul Brown 嘅經典作品《Aftershocks》。導演 Terence Crawford 就指出紀錄劇場作品一個好重要嘅作用。
It's a play about an event in history that was a significant event, and if nothing else, people come out of it. People go into it or come out of it saying, who might have been born after 1989, many of our audience said, I didn't know this had happened. So if nothing else, they've learned something. They've learnt that this event happened unexpectedly. And I think the other really interesting thing is that the play is, as much as it is about an earthquake, it is about a club. It is about an old Australia that doesn't exist anymore, about a workers' club. There are still buildings called workers' clubs, but they're thoroughly corporatised. The earthquake really marked the end of what that club and clubs like it were and are about. So it's a play about that community. It's a play about the workers' club as much as it's a play about an earthquake. So aside from whatever that might do or specifically impact on an audience emotionally or socially or politically, it is interesting and worthwhile to go to the theatre and learn something.
Elena 試過咁多唔同嘅形式去處理紀錄劇場，佢又點睇紀錄劇場將來嘅發展呢？
And I think that documentary theatre has to keep evolving. So, I just think that you need to, I like the idea that, because verbatim is now so ubiquitous, it's used in dance, it's used in so many forms. So I think that as playwrights, we have to keep freshening the form.